Today for maths, we are continuing to look at elapsed time. I will show you what the work looks like in your book. This is what your work should look like in your book. You will need the title. The title is Elapsed Time, Measuring Time. Make sure you write that exact title now in your exercise book. I have now zoomed in on what you need to write in your exercise book now. Pause the video now and write this in your book under the title, questions 1, 2, 3 and 4. You don't need the answer yet. That is what is going to occur later in this lesson. All you need to do is just get the questions written onto your page. Please pause this video now and copy this exact page so it looks exactly the same in your exercise book. Pause the video and do this now. This is what the second part of your page should look like. You need to set out your 8 clocks exactly like mine on screen. The first clock has a time marked on it. You need to mark in that time and then write 10 minutes later and draw in a blank analog clock. For the next one, draw the clock showing this exact time and then write 55 minutes later and draw in a blank analog clock, because the blank clocks is where you'll show your answer, but leave them blank for now. Underneath the exact analog clock, and draw that time and then write 25 minutes later. Then next to it, draw in a blank analog clock. Then the final clock with that exact time drawn and then 35 minutes later written, and then draw a blank analog clock. So you should have 8 clocks. For each question you have to have that exact time and then a blank clock for you to draw your answers eventually. You can ask an adult that is helping you to help you draw these clocks so that it is a little faster for you. But when we need to work out these answers, try and have a go for yourself. Pause the video now and draw all of this in your books exactly as I've done underneath the questions 1 to 4. This way your page is prepared before you continue on with the rest of the lesson. So pause the video now. Okay, you are all prepared to start our lesson and we are going to continue on. You should all have your title, you should have the first part written in, and you should have the second part drawn in. You can't continue on with the lesson unless this is all done now. We are now going to continue on with the video lesson. You should be all prepared to start learning. Today for maths, we are going to be looking at elapsed time. Last week we looked at elapsed time and we were looking at what the time would be 1 hour later, so time in the future, and what the time was 30 minutes earlier, time in the past. And we learned that elapsed time refers to time that has gone by. Today we will be looking at the minute hand and working mostly with moving the minute hand around the clock. The minute hand moves around the clock to mark 60 minutes every hour. The minute hand is the long hand and the hour hand is the short, small hand. So the minute hand moves around the clock to mark 60 minutes every hour. There we go. Each little mark here between each number marks 1 minute, and there are 5 minutes between each number, so count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead of moving our minute hand all the way around the clock to show 60 minutes, I do not always have to start on the 12 to mark 1 hour. My long minute hand could be at the 1. But if it moves 1 full circle around and back to the 1, That is still 1 full hour. But a faster way to do this is count in fives. Instead of moving my hand all the way around the clock, because remember there is 5 minutes between each number. This number, and this number, between all of the numbers. So a faster way to find out an hour is to count in fives. So say we start here. That isn't 5 now. I can count in fives, but wherever it is pointing to now, how it's pointing to the 1, that is like a 0. We need to move it to the next number, and then it will be 5. And then we can count on from there. Count with me. So, count with me. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. We've now done a full rotation around the clock, and 60 minutes is 1 hour. 1 hour is 60 minutes. And you see how nice and quick it was easy to count in fives. Remember when we were finding out 1 hour later, our minute hand, wherever it starts, that is always where it will end up. Okay, today we are going to be looking at the number of minutes it takes the minute hand to move from one number to another. So right now, the long minute hand is pointing to the 2. There we go. If I want to know how many minutes there are between the 2 and the 5, I could count by ones because the little dashes are 1. So I want to find out how many minutes there are between the 2, so on the 2 here, all the way to the 5. So I could count each individual dash. So count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So there's 15 minutes between the 2 and the 5 numbers. And I could count each individual dash because each individual dash is 1 minute, but that is really slow. It would be very slow and inefficient. In maths, we want strategies that will help us solve problems efficiently, which means nice and fast and accurate. So the best way for us to work out how many minutes there are between the number 2 here and 5 is to count by fives. Count with me. 5, 10, 15. There's exactly 15 minutes between the numbers 2 and 5. Let's have a look at another one. The long minute hand is now going to start on the 5. If I want to know how many minutes there are between the 5 and the 11 up here, then I would count by fives. Count with me as I move the long minute hand. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Between the 5 and the 11, there are 30 minutes. Let's have a look at another number. The long minute hand is on the 11. If I want to know how many minutes there are between the 11 and the 1, I will count by fives. Count with me. 5, 10. There's exactly 10 minutes between the numbers 11 and 1. Now I have already shown you the sheet you need to do in your book, and I have already asked you to pause the video and copy that out so you have your work ready to go. I'm going to go through question 1, 2, 3 and 4 in the first part of your sheet so that you can do them and answer them on your page in your book now. Have a look. This is the first part of the activity, and these are the questions that we are going to answer now, and they should already be in your books. I'm going to go through each one now, and we're going to answer them. Between the 6 and the 7. So my big long minute hand is now pointing to the 6. We are going to work out how many minutes there are between the 6 and the 7. So if the long minute hand is on the 6, you need to calculate how many minutes there are between this 6 and 7 and write it in now. Number 2 says 6 to 9. So my big hand is on the 6 and we need to work out, meaning how many minutes are there between the 6 and the 9, which means you need to count by 5s to work out how many minutes between the 6 and the 9. Number 3 asks you to calculate how many minutes between the 7 and 11. So if the long minute hand starts on the 7, you need to count by 5s to the 11 and write down how many minutes has passed. The final one, question 4, is how many minutes from 6 to 12. If the long minute hand starts on the 6, counting by 5s, how many minutes to the 12? I want you to pause this video now so that you can complete those 4 questions first. Go and complete those 4 questions in your exercise book, then come back to the video and press play and continue listening. I have included the link in the captions to this video below. So if you need to open this clock and use it to help you count by 5s and work out the answer, you can. Please pause the video now and complete questions 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is now part 2 of the elapsed time lesson. In the picture, you can see there are 8 clocks, and this should be already prepared in your exercise books. The first clock shows a time in the analog clock and then the words 10 minutes later and then a blank clock. The second question shows an analog clock with the time drawn in and then the words 55 minutes later and a blank clock. The third question shows a time on an analog clock and then 25 minutes later and then a blank clock. The last one shows a time on an analog clock and then 35 minutes later and a blank clock. Your test is to calculate what the time will be when 10 minutes or 55 minutes or 25 minutes or 35 minutes has gone by. The first clock shows this time. The long minute hand is pointing to the 7 and the short hour hand is about halfway between the 10 and the 11. We read this time as 10:35 or 25 minutes to 11. You are asked to tell me what the time will be 10 minutes later. That means if you move the minute hand 10 minutes forward, counting by 5s, you will know what the time will be. 5:10. It means on the blank clock, you now need to draw the long minute hand pointing to the 9 and the short hour hand just before the 11. It is in the middle of the 10 and 11. So this is how you do the first one. You draw in this exact time now because we worked it out in your blank clock. The second clock shows the following time. The second clock shows the time 5 to 8. The long minute hand is pointing to the 11 and the short hour hand is just before the 8. It's asking us what is the time 55 minutes later. You need to move the minute hand 55 minutes forward, counting by 5s. So you would start 5, 10, 15, 20. And you would keep going all the way till you get to 55. When you get to 55, stop moving the minute hand because we are only working at 55 minutes. Then you should have a time on your clock where you can now copy and draw in the minute hand and the hour hand on the blank clock. What you see on the screen right now is not the answers. If I keep counting to 55, I will be giving away the answer. So I have stopped early. I want you to work it out for yourself using your own clock. The third time on the clock shows 25 minutes past 10 or 10:25. This is the time. 25 minutes past 10 or 10:25. It is asking you what the time will be 25 minutes later. So you'll have to move the minute hand counting in fives to 25. 5, 10, 15. And you would keep going all the way until you get to 25 because we are working at 25 minutes. When you get to 25, stop moving the minute hand. You will then need to draw the time on your clock once you've finished moving, marking where the long minute hand is pointing and where is the short hour hand pointing. What's on screen is not the answer. If I keep counting to 25, I would give the answer away and I want you to answer it for yourself. So I have stopped. The fourth and final clock shows 20 minutes past 2 or 2:20, and it is asking you what the time will be 35 minutes later. You will need to move the minute hand counting in fives to 35. For example, 5, 10, 15, 20, and keep going until you get to 35. When you get to 35, stop, and on the blank clock, mark in that exact time where the long minute hand is pointing and the short hour hand is pointing. What's on screen is not the answer. I have stopped and I do not want to give the answer away. I want you to do it for yourself. So now you need to go and do it for yourself. Remember, in the captions below there is a link to this clock so you can use it to help you work out the 4 answers to the 4 clocks.